In the bustling streets of New York City, where skyscrapers stretch toward the sky and people move in a constant rush, lives often intertwine in unexpected ways. Among the sea of people, few pay attention to others, unless something catches their eye. It was an ordinary afternoon when Amelia Johnson, a poised and confident woman in her early 40s, stepped into Madison Avenue Jewelry Gallery. She had spent weeks planning this visit, eager to surprise her husband, Derek, with the perfect anniversary gift. Amelia wasn't just any customer. She was a successful lawyer, well known for her fierce advocacy for equality. But what should have been a simple shopping trip was about to expose a hidden reality, one of prejudice, power, and injustice. The jewelry store was a haven for the elite, its polished glass windows displaying glittering diamonds that symbolized wealth and status. As Amelia admired the elegant selection, her eyes landed on a stunning diamond pendant, a piece she knew Derek would love. "Can I help you with something?" She looked up to see a tall, blonde saleswoman standing behind the counter. The woman's expression was polite but distant, her voice clipped with an undercurrent of something else, something less welcoming. "Yes, I'd like to see this necklace, please," Amelia said, pointing to the pendant. The employee hesitated, her gaze sweeping over Amelia in subtle scrutiny. It was almost imperceptible, but Amelia felt it. A flicker of judgment, a silent questioning of her presence in a store like this. Reluctantly, the woman unlocked the case and handed her the necklace, her smile forced. As Amelia admired the craftsmanship, she sensed the woman's eyes lingering on her, not with curiosity but with suspicion. She had felt this kind of scrutiny before, the unspoken doubts cast upon her simply because of the color of her skin. "How much is this?" Amelia asked, keeping her voice steady. The woman's lips tightened. Then, with a condescending smirk, she said, "Are you sure you can afford this?" Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Not because she couldn't afford the necklace, she could, but because of what the question implied. She had encountered prejudice before, but this was different. This was a direct challenge to her dignity. "Yes," Amelia said, her tone calm but firm. The saleswoman's expression shifted to thinly veiled annoyance. She reached out to take the necklace back. "I think it would be better if you returned it to the case," she said, louder this time, drawing the attention of other customers. Amelia felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. Carefully, she placed the necklace back on its velvet pad. "There's no need for that," she said, trying to maintain her composure. But it was too late. The saleswoman had already signaled security. A tall, imposing security guard approached, his stern gaze flickering between Amelia and the saleswoman. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. "This woman was trying to steal that necklace," the saleswoman declared, loud enough for the entire store to hear. The words hit Amelia like a slap. The accusation was so sudden, so outrageous that for a moment she was speechless. "I wasn't," she started, but the guard cut her off. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." His voice was firm, though not unkind. A hush had fallen over the store. Customers whispered. Some pulled out their phones, recording the unfolding scene. Amelia took a deep breath. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She could fight back, demand justice, but in that moment she knew it wouldn't matter. Raising her voice would only escalate things. So instead, she lifted her chin and said, "Fine. Let's go." In the security office, Amelia sat stiffly as the guard reviewed the footage. Each passing second felt like an eternity. Finally he returned. His expression had softened, his voice quieter now. "We reviewed the footage," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're free to go." Amelia nodded. But the damage was already done. She walked out of the store, past the gawking customers and whispering onlookers, the weight of the experience pressing down on her. This wasn't just about her. It was about every black person who had been wrongly judged before they even opened their mouth. It was about a world that still saw skin color before character. That evening when Amelia got home, she told Derek everything. She tried to hold back the emotion, but the anger, the humiliation, and the sheer injustice of it all spilled out. Derek listened, his expression darkening with every word. "They treated you like a criminal," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "In my city? In my mall?" Amelia looked at him, confused. "What do you mean your mall?" she asked. Derek stood, his jaw clenched. "I own that entire shopping center." Amelia's breath caught. "This isn't over," Derek said. "They think they can get away with treating you like that? Not a chance." The next morning, Amelia met with Marcus, the security guard who had cleared her name. They sat at a cafe near the mall, where Marcus shook his head in regret. "I'm really sorry you had to go through that," he said. "I could tell something wasn't right, but I had to follow protocol." "I understand," Amelia said. "But this isn't just about me. This happens every day to people like me. And it needs to stop. Marcus hesitated, then leaned forward. I've seen this happen before, he admitted. You're not the first. Amelia's resolve hardened. Then let's do something about it. Over the next few weeks, Amelia and Marcus worked together to expose the store's discriminatory practices. They collected evidence, interviewed former employees, and compiled testimonies from other wrongly accused customers. And when the time was right, Derek took action. The jewelry store's management received an eviction notice. Their lease? Terminated. The store that had once prided itself on catering to the city's elite was now empty, its doors permanently closed. As for Amelia, she had turned her humiliation into something more powerful. She had turned injustice into action. And this time she had the last word. After weeks of relentless investigation, Amelia and Marcus had gathered overwhelming evidence against Madison Avenue Jewelry Gallery. They interviewed employees, reviewed additional security footage, and collected testimonies from other customers who had experienced similar discrimination. Each story added another layer to the injustice, painting a picture of a pattern of racial profiling and prejudice that had gone unchecked for too long. Then, during a routine review of financial records and employee files, Marcus made a shocking discovery. The store's manager, Claire Benson, had been in contact with Richard Evans, a businessman who had been trying to buy out Derek's mall for years. It became clear that this was more than just an isolated incident. Richard Evans was using the store's discriminatory practices as a weapon to undermine Derek's business and force him to sell. Amelia couldn't believe it. What had started as a personal act of racism had turned out to be part of a much larger conspiracy. She and Derek weren't just being targeted because of who they were being targeted because of the power they held. With this new information in hand, Amelia and Marcus knew they had to act quickly. They compiled all the evidence, the security footage, the testimonies, the financial records, and prepared to confront the store's management. The day of the confrontation arrived. Amelia, Derek, Marcus, and a few trusted allies walked into the store, their evidence in hand. Claire Benson was waiting for them, her expression cold and unyielding. "We know what you've been doing," Amelia said, her voice steady. "We have evidence of your discriminatory practices, and we know about your connection to Richard Evans. This stops now." For a moment, Claire looked shaken, but she quickly recovered, her face hardening into a mask of defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, crossing her arms. Derek stepped forward, his presence commanding. "You've been caught," he said, his voice low and firm. "We have enough evidence to take this to court. And believe me, we will. Unless you want to lose everything, I suggest you cooperate." Claire's face paled as she realized the gravity of the situation. After a tense silence, she finally relented. "Fine," she said. "What do you want?" "We want accountability," Amelia said. "You'll publicly admit what you've done and step down as manager. You'll also implement training for your employees to ensure this never happens again." Claire hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." With that, the confrontation was over. But for Amelia and Derek, the fight had only just begun. They knew this was about more than just one store. It was about changing the way people of color were treated in spaces of power and privilege. And they weren't going to stop until justice was served. A few days later, Amelia and Derek held a press conference to share their story with the world. The media turned out in droves, eager to cover the scandal that had rocked one of New York's most prestigious shopping centers. As they stood before the cameras, Amelia felt a surge of determination. "This isn't just about me," Amelia said, her voice clear and strong. "It's about the countless people who face discrimination every day simply because of the color of their skin. It's about justice. And it's about making sure no one else has to go through what I went through." Derek stepped up next, presenting the evidence they had gathered, the security footage, the testimonies, the financial records. As the reporters took it all in, murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the crowd. "We are calling for immediate action," Derek said, his voice firm. "This is not just a personal matter. It's a matter of public accountability. And we won't rest until justice is done." By the end of the day, the press conference had gone viral. Social media was flooded with messages of support for Amelia and Derek, with people across the country demanding change. The pressure on the store's management was immense. Within days, Claire Benson had stepped down as manager, and new policies were implemented to ensure no customer would ever face discrimination again. Amelia and Derek had won. But the victory was bittersweet. The scars from that humiliating day in the jewelry store would never fully heal. Yet, they had turned their pain into power, using their platform to bring about real change. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Days after the press conference, Amelia's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from people expressing their support. Some were friends, others were strangers who had seen the story on the news. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who had experienced similar injustices, their voices finally finding a platform in Amelia's story. Amelia felt a deep sense of responsibility. This fight was no longer just about her, it was about everyone who had ever been wrongfully accused, belittled, or mistreated simply because of the color of their skin. But with that responsibility came increasing pressure. One afternoon, as Amelia sat at the kitchen table, Derek noticed her deep in thought, her phone buzzing beside her, untouched. He put down his cup of coffee and reached across the table to take her hand. "You've been quiet," Derek said softly, his eyes filled with concern. "What's on your mind?" Amelia sighed, rubbing her temples. "It just feels bigger than me now. I'm glad we spoke out, but there's so much more to do. The more I think about it, the more I realize how much change is still needed. And I'm not sure if I'm ready for all of it." Derek squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to do it all at once. You've already made a huge impact. You're opening doors for others. But don't forget to take care of yourself too." Amelia gave him a small smile, appreciating his support. He always knew how to ground her when things felt overwhelming. But she also knew deep down that this was only the beginning. Her voice had been amplified, and now people were looking to her to keep pushing for change. Later that week, Amelia received a call from Marcus. "Hey, I've been doing some digging," he said, his tone serious. "I think you need to know something." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "I was going through some old reports and found that this isn't the first time there's been trouble at that jewelry store. There have been other complaints, racial profiling, discriminatory treatment, the whole thing. But it was buried." "How is that possible?" Amelia asked, frowning. "How has no one spoken up before?" "That's the thing," Marcus said. "People did speak up. But management hushed it up, paid off victims, or threatened them with legal action if they went public. They've been covering this up for years." Amelia's stomach turned. This was worse than she had imagined. What had happened to her wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a system that had been allowed to thrive in silence. She knew she couldn't let this slide. "If they've been doing this for years, it's time they answer for all of it," Amelia said. "We need to go public with this. The people who were silenced before deserve justice." "I agree," Marcus said. "But we'll need more than just what we have now. We need people to come forward." "I'll take care of that," Amelia said. "I'll reach out to the media and get people to speak up." Over the next few days, Amelia worked tirelessly, determined to build a case that would expose the store's long history of discriminatory practices. Slowly, former customers came forward, sharing their experiences. This wasn't just about one store anymore. It was about dismantling a system of injustice. And Amelia was ready for the fight. "I'm done being silent," he said firmly. "This stops now." Amelia spoke again, her words resonating deeply with everyone in the room. "We are not asking for much," she said. "We are asking for what should be given freely to everyone: respect, dignity, and the right to exist without being judged based on assumptions. And we will not stop until we see real change." The press conference was a turning point. Media coverage exploded, and soon the story was everywhere. People across the country called for accountability, demanding the jewelry store face consequences for its actions. The pressure mounted, and within days the store's corporate office issued a public apology, announcing an internal investigation and mandatory diversity training for all employees. Claire Benson, the manager who had allowed the discrimination to continue unchecked, was permanently removed from her position. But for Amelia, that wasn't enough. She knew there was more to be done. Behind the scenes, Amelia and Marcus built a legal case against the store. They worked tirelessly with a team of lawyers, gathering testimonies, documents, security footage, everything they could use to ensure justice was fully served. Weeks turned into months as they prepared for trial, a grueling process that demanded every ounce of Amelia's strength. Derek stood by her side every step of the way, his unwavering support keeping her grounded. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Amelia took the stand. She was nervous, but she understood the weight of her words. She had to speak her truth, not just for herself but for everyone who had been wronged. As she recounted the events of that day in the jewelry store, the room fell silent. Every eye was on her, every word carrying the burden of injustice. One by one, other victims testified, their stories weaving together a damning picture of the store's discriminatory practices. The defense attempted to argue these were isolated incidents, mistakes by individual employees. But the overwhelming evidence told a different story. In the end, the jury found the jewelry store guilty of racial discrimination, ordering them to pay a substantial settlement to the victims. More importantly, they were required to implement sweeping changes to their policies to ensure such injustices never happened again. As Amelia walked out of the courthouse, a sense of relief washed over her. The fight had been long and exhausting, but they had won. Justice had been served. More than that, they had made a difference. In the weeks that followed, Amelia reflected on everything that had transpired. She had started this journey as a victim, humiliated and wrongfully accused, but she had emerged stronger, more determined, and with a clearer sense of purpose. One evening, as she and Derek sat in their living room, watching the sunset, Amelia turned to him. "Do you think we've really made a difference?" she asked softly. Derek smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We have. You have. You stood up for yourself and so many others. You showed people that they don't have to be afraid to fight for what's right." Amelia nodded, resting her head against his chest. "I just hope people don't forget what this was all about." "They won't," Derek said gently. "You've sparked something, Amelia. Change is slow, but it's happening, because of people like you who are willing to stand up and say, 'Enough.'" As they sat together, a sense of peace settled over Amelia. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but she had proven that it was possible to push back against injustice, to make the world a little fairer, one step at a time. And that was a victory worth celebrating. Life slowly returned to normal for Amelia and Derek, though normal now felt different. The battle they had fought left them more aware of the world around them and the responsibility they carried as people in positions of influence. Amelia was constantly approached by people, on the street, at events, even online, thanking her for what she had done. Some shared their own stories of injustice, while others simply expressed admiration for her bravery. One thing became clear: people were watching and they expected more. One afternoon, as Amelia sifted through emails, a message caught her eye. It was from a young woman named Kendra, who wrote about her experiences facing discrimination in her workplace. She worked at a high-end retail store in Manhattan and had been repeatedly passed over for promotions despite her qualifications. When she questioned these decisions, her supervisors made veiled comments about how certain clients preferred to be helped by people who looked a certain way. It was all too familiar. "I feel trapped," Kendra wrote. "I know what they're doing is wrong, but I'm afraid to speak up. If I do, I could lose my job, and I need this job to support my family. But I can't keep pretending like everything's fine." As Amelia read Kendra's words, a familiar fire ignited within her. She knew exactly how Kendra felt: the helplessness, the fear of losing everything for daring to push back. But she also knew that staying silent wasn't the answer. She arranged to meet Kendra at a small cafe near her workplace. When they met, Amelia could see the exhaustion in Kendra's eyes, the weight of carrying this burden for so long. Over coffee, Kendra opened up about the microaggressions, the blatant favoritism, the way her concerns were dismissed. "I'm scared," Kendra admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to do. If I speak up, they'll find a way to push me out. I've seen it happen before." Amelia listened, her heart heavy with empathy. "You're not alone," she said gently. "I know it feels like you are, but you're not. And you don't have to fight this battle by yourself." Kendra searched Amelia's face for reassurance. "But what can I do? I can't afford to lose my job." "You don't have to go through this alone," Amelia repeated. "We can bring attention to what's happening. We can make sure they know you have support. And if they retaliate, we'll make sure the public knows exactly what they're doing." Kendra was silent, processing Amelia's words. She was scared, that much was clear, but Amelia could see the flicker of hope in her eyes, the tiny spark that told her Kendra was ready to fight. "Okay," Kendra said finally, her voice steadying. "I'll do it. I'll speak up." The decision wasn't made lightly. Amelia knew that once Kendra took this step, there would be no going back. But she also knew that silence was no longer an option. Too many people had stayed silent for too long. Amelia connected Kendra with a lawyer specializing in employment discrimination. They documented every detail: comments, missed promotions, dismissed concerns. Slowly their case grew stronger. Meanwhile, Amelia continued her advocacy, now more determined than ever. As Kendra's case gained traction, the media took notice. News outlets covered the story, drawing parallels to Amelia's own battle against the jewelry store. Public outrage mounted, and the retail store faced growing pressure. At first, management tried to sweep it under the rug. But this time, the world was watching. As Kendra's legal team built their case, more employees came forward. What had happened to Kendra wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. When the case finally went to court, the atmosphere was electric. Protesters gathered outside, demanding justice. Reporters filled the courtroom. Kendra took the stand, no longer the scared woman who had first reached out. She spoke with confidence, her voice unwavering as she told her truth. "I worked hard," she said. "I earned the right to be considered for those promotions just like everyone else. But I was never given a fair chance, and that's not right." The evidence was irrefutable. The jury sided with Kendra. The company was found guilty of discriminatory practices and ordered to pay a significant settlement. But more importantly, lasting change had been set in motion. They were required to implement sweeping changes to their hiring and promotion policies, as well as mandatory diversity training for all employees. The victory was a major milestone, not just for Kendra but for everyone who had been wronged by the company's actions. It sent a powerful message that discrimination would no longer be tolerated, that those who sought to oppress and marginalize others would be held accountable. As Amelia and Kendra walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the victory settled over them. Kendra was smiling, though tears shimmered in her eyes. "Thank you," Kendra whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't think I could have done this without you." Amelia smiled, pulling her into a warm embrace. "You did this," she said softly. "I just helped you see that you could." The case made headlines for weeks, sparking a national conversation about discrimination in the workplace and the importance of creating systems that allowed everyone, regardless of race or background, to thrive. Companies across the country began reassessing their own policies, afraid of being the next target of a public scandal. For Amelia, the fight wasn't over, but she knew they had made progress. They had taken a stand and won. With each victory, the path forward became a little clearer. Back home, as Amelia and Derek sat together one evening, the quiet hum of the city outside their window, Derek glanced at her, his eyes filled with admiration. "You know," he said, his voice low, "I always knew you were strong, but watching you these last few months, I've never been prouder of you." Amelia smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through finally beginning to lift. But even as they enjoyed this quiet moment of peace, Amelia's mind was already racing toward the future. There was so much more to be done. "I was thinking," Amelia said after a while, "about starting an organization, something bigger. Something that could help people like Kendra, people who don't have the resources or the voice to fight back on their own." Derek smiled, kissing the top of her head. "I think that's a brilliant idea. And I think you're just the person to do it." Amelia's heart swelled with excitement. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth fighting for ever was. The journey ahead was long, but she was ready. She had already proven to herself and to the world that one person could make a difference, and now she was ready to take that difference even further. A few weeks after Kendra's case wrapped up, Amelia couldn't shake the idea of building something bigger, an organization that could not only help people like Kendra but also challenge systemic injustice across industries. She had seen firsthand how powerful it could be to give people a platform to speak out, but she knew that many others still remained silent, too afraid or too unsure of where to turn. Amelia spent days mapping out her vision. She wanted to create a place where anyone facing discrimination could find legal support, emotional guidance, and most importantly, the courage to fight back. This wouldn't just be a law firm, it would be a movement, a rallying point for people from all walks of life who believed in equality and justice. One evening, after she had scribbled out the 100th idea on a notepad, Derek looked up from across the room. "You've been busy," he said with a smile, nodding toward the papers that covered the dining table. "I have," Amelia replied, her eyes bright with excitement. "I think I'm ready to start building this thing, but I'm going to need help." Derek stood up, walking over to the table and glancing over her notes. "You'll get it," he said confidently. "There are people out there who want to see change just as much as you do. All you have to do is ask." Amelia nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. She knew Derek was right. She couldn't do this alone, and she didn't have to. Over the next few weeks, Amelia reached out to people in her network. Lawyers, activists, community leaders, even some of the people who had stood by her during her fight with the jewelry store. The response was overwhelming. Word began to spread, and before long, people were offering their support, eager to be part of something that promised real change. Amelia held meetings in small conference rooms, living rooms, and cafes, discussing strategy, resources, and goals. She was determined that this organization, which she eventually named the Justice Collective, would be more than just another nonprofit. It would be a force for accountability and fairness. A place where people could come not only to find justice for themselves but to demand systemic change. The launch of the Justice Collective came quicker than expected. With a handful of passionate individuals working alongside her, Amelia organized a public event to announce the organization. They rented out a local community center, inviting anyone who wanted to learn more about their mission. The night of the launch, the hall was packed with people of all ages, races, and backgrounds. There were reporters from local news stations, lawyers eager to lend their expertise, and activists ready to mobilize their communities. Some people came out of curiosity, others because they had been personally affected by discrimination. But they all had one thing in common: they wanted to be part of something that would make a difference. Amelia took the stage, her heart pounding with anticipation. As she looked out at the crowd, she felt a rush of gratitude for everyone who had supported her up until this point. This was bigger than she had ever imagined, but it was exactly what she had hoped for. "Thank you all for being here," Amelia began, her voice strong but filled with emotion. The Justice Collective was born out of a personal fight for dignity and respect, but it has grown into something much larger. We are here today because we believe that no one should have to fight injustice alone. We are here because we know that change doesn't happen overnight, but it does happen when we stand together. The crowd erupted in applause, the energy in the room electric. "This is just the beginning," she continued. "We have a long road ahead, but with every case we take on, every voice we amplify, and every system we hold accountable, we are moving closer to the world we know is possible. A world where no one is judged by the color of their skin, their gender, their background, or their beliefs. A world where justice is not just a word, but a reality for everyone." By the time the event ended, the Justice Collective had already gained dozens of new supporters, volunteers, and donations. It was clear that the organization had struck a chord with people who were tired of waiting for someone else to make things right. They wanted to be part of the change. In the months that followed, the Justice Collective grew rapidly. Amelia and her team took on cases ranging from workplace discrimination to housing injustice to police misconduct. Every victory they won, every policy they helped change, made them stronger and more determined. The fight wasn't easy. Some cases dragged on for years, bogged down by legal bureaucracy and resistance from powerful corporations. But Amelia had learned that change was slow, and that didn't mean it wasn't happening. With each step forward, she knew they were making a difference. And that was a victory worth fighting for.